In this video, I'm going to talk about navigating the complexities of being an empath. More specifically, 5 essential things I've learned from an amazing book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. First off, you should know that Mate's book is not specifically about empaths. The title says The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. So it focuses on establishing this connection between self-abnegation or stress and illness, especially inflammation. However, I took what I learned and I applied it to being an empath. And I want to share these things because they helped me tremendously. What is an empath then? It's someone who tunes into other people's emotions. They can't help it. This usually starts in childhood. They absorb emotions, whether negative or positive, to the point where sometimes they don't even know which feeling is theirs and which belongs to other people. Empaths are more often than not afraid to disappoint others. For example, to say no to some requests because they can actually feel disappointment in advance. So they try to avoid it, and in the process, they deny their own needs. They sometimes feel weighed down by expectations, and more importantly, they take on burdens which aren't really theirs to carry. Now, if this is you, just as it is me, please don't think of being an empath as a curse. I don't actually believe in these two extremes associated with being an empath. Oh, it's either a blessing or a gift or a curse. I think they're both reductive. So let's dive into it. 5 things I've learned from Mate's book. Number one, trauma is in most cases multi-generational. Whether small t or capital T trauma, Mate says that whatever isn't resolved in someone is passed on to their offspring. So empaths especially will tend to absorb what is not theirs and not even know where it comes from. It might come from a previous generation, and I'll come back to this later. Please remember, however, that blame has no place here. Sometimes there isn't someone to blame. And it's also a matter of everyone operating from the level of consciousness they are at. So you can't blame someone for not being aware of something, right? As simple as that. Number two, because of trauma, people may develop characteristics that result in illness, especially inflammation. This came as a surprise to me, although when I read the evidence, it suddenly became so obvious. I still had a big aha moment. Let me give you some examples. If someone grew up in a home where they couldn't really express negative feelings, they learn to permanently suppress them. If someone is taught to put other people's needs above their own, they might develop this highly altruistic behavior. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? If you never look at your own needs, if you never prioritize yourself, your body will signal that to you at some point, and it might be through illness. As empaths, especially, if you avoid tension and conflict at all costs for the sake of keeping others happy, again, that will take a toll. And in some more extreme cases, people might develop, as Mate calls it, super autonomous self-sufficiency, and that means they feel they don't need anyone ever. The problem is that such characteristics are typical of women, for example, who end up suffering from breast cancer. And this is because there's a oneness of the human psyche or the mind, and the body. And this is called body mind, in fact, one word, body mind. The list that Mate has come up with in terms of what's prominent among people with all manner of chronic illness is the following in no particular order. This was quite the revelation for me, as some of these things are actually admired by society, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful about them. So there's this automatic and compulsive concern for the emotional needs of others while ignoring one's own. There's rigid identification with social role, duty, and responsibility. Overdriven, externally focused, multitasking, hyper responsibility based on the conviction that one must justify one's existence by doing and giving. Repression of healthy self protective aggression and anger, and harboring and compulsively acting out two beliefs. I am responsible for how other people feel, and I must never disappoint anyone. The good news is that these personality patterns, which are in essence coping mechanisms, are reversible, and with them, so may the disease, Mate says, as an expert. And he gives many examples to illustrate this. For instance, there's Dr. Rankin, who recovered from serious illness, but she doesn't attribute this to conventional medicine. She says it's because of her personal transformation journey. Within 6 months of quitting my job, I was off all my medications, she says. And then Mate adds, she is now a mother, a healer, a seminar leader, the author of several books. Her key insight was to recognize her entire life as the ground for her several illnesses, physical and mental, not separate entities but dynamic processes expressing her interactions with the world. I had been a stereotypical good girl, overachiever, top of my class, always pushing to develop my talent and intellect, not to satisfy me, but to be accepted by others. That relentless pressure, she learned, manifested in her medical conditions. She had to let it go. And this leads me to my next idea. Number three, disease can be a teacher. Again, quite shocking, right? Because we think of disease as an enemy, something that needs to be fought. And in some cases, people lose the battle with the disease. Think of the actor who sadly died after playing the character of Black Panther, right? He had cancer. Interestingly, however, Mate says that when the body is ill, instead of blaming the body for being ill, we can ask it instead, what are you trying to tell me? And in some cases that he discusses, some patients said that um, disease was a way for their body to tell them, wake up, wake up. And then Mate adds, symptoms of illness are the body's way of letting us know when we have strayed from our core or essence. My experience is that when parts of us can't get through to us otherwise, they don't have a lot of options, but they do have the body. Disease's role as teacher rests in how it leads people to question everything they had thought and felt about themselves, and to retain only what serves their wholeness. Point number four, healing is always possible, but it requires vulnerability, letting go, and authenticity. Mother talks about two essential needs in all children. One is the need for love, essentially, and then the second one is the need for authenticity, for children to be themselves. Now, what happens is that sometimes these two needs are in conflict. For example, if a child is told a good child doesn't get angry, then he or she will learn to suppress even healthy feelings of anger for the sake of being loved. They will also associate inauthenticity with survival on an emotional level. And survival on an emotional level will always take precedence for a child as long as they're a child. Now, no one can go back and change the past, but they can change the present. They can heal. The question is how. It starts with not running from vulnerability, from looking at our shadows, as Carl Jung put it. And this is something Mate is brave enough to do in his old age, because he admits the following. My own workaholism as a physician earned me much respect, gratitude, remuneration, and status in the world, even as it undermined my mental health and my family's emotional balance. And why was I workaholic? Because stemming from my early experiences, I needed to be needed, wanted, admired as a substitute for love. I never consciously decided to be driven that way, and yet it worked all too well for me in the social and professional realms. Mate also talks about his Jewish background, the toll this took on his emotions as a child, and possibly an empath. He never specifically says it. Um, he says, under the conditions of war and genocide, I absorbed the feelings of my grief stricken and terrorized mother. In my earliest photos, I see my little self almost mirroring them. Mate has always struggled to heal from his past. He talks about a colleague looking at him at some point and just saying, Gabor, you don't need to drag Auschwitz around with you everywhere you go. So you might wonder, what's the solution? Well, according to the examples that he provides, the solution is letting go. And I'll give you the example of Edith, also from the book. So she was 16 years old when the Holocaust happened. Her parents were sent straight to the gas chambers, and then she endured horrors that she describes in a book called The Choice. You might ask, well, was there any choice to begin with? That's the problem, right? She didn't choose her past. However, Mate says that she found a way to exercise the only agency she had, which lay in her own point of view and emotional attitude towards the unchangeable past. And in the process of doing that, she ended up forgiving, who do you think? Hitler. Hitler himself. She went to his former home and she says, I forgave him. This had nothing to do with Hitler. It was something I did for me. I was letting go, releasing that part of myself that had spent most of my life exerting mental and emotional energy to keep Hitler in chains. As long as I was holding on to that rage, I was in chains with him, locked in the damaging past, locked in my grief. To forgive is to grieve for what happened, for what didn't happen. And then this next bit was my undoing. I pondered this for so long. It's so profound. She says to forgive is to give up the need for a different past, to accept life as it was and as it is. Mate concludes she came to choose her past, not in the sense of liking or condoning it, but by simply letting it be. Now, the third thing that helps healing along is authenticity. Basically, not being afraid of disappointing others, not being afraid of being disliked when we're authentic. This is the hardest thing in the world for an empath, believe me, but it needs to be done. Even healthy anger needs to be expressed. And Mate explains this. Healthy anger is a response of the moment, not a beast we keep in the basement. It is situational, its duration limited, a valid natural feeling that does not in itself intend anyone any harm. And also advocating authenticity, Mate says that ultimately your greatest gift to the world is being who you are. What is in us must out, otherwise we may explode at the wrong times or become hopelessly hemmed in by frustrations, suffocated in silence, as he himself experienced. So the way I see it, the best way to show the world who you are is by following your instincts in terms of how to reveal this. Mate's own experience is that he occasionally felt something in his body, even a voice telling him that he should write, and eventually he listened to it. He says, I needed to write to express myself through written language, not only so that others might hear me, but so that I could hear myself. Wonderful, right? I personally heard a little voice inside me telling me I should write, and that's why I started a blog last year. I encourage you, whatever a little voice inside you says, heed it. It could be a talent such as singing or playing a musical instrument, even composing music, writing poetry, writing prose. It could be making YouTube videos to tell the world what you think about different topics, using your world knowledge, your expertise. It could be an unusual talent that people will enjoy so very much, especially because it's not something they're used to seeing. Whatever it is, show it. Don't be afraid. As an empath, this is essential. You need to express yourself. You need to um, make sure that your voice is heard in whatever way. Now, the final insight derived from Mate's book is number 5, and I'm paraphrasing here: the cost of refusing awareness is too great, especially for an empath. What do I mean? If you refuse to look at your shadows, this will affect not only your health, but also your personal relationships and your very ability to enjoy life. For example, if you feel weighed down by burdens and energies that aren't yours, um, that will be a problem. Even being in a room full of people will cause you to sometimes absorb, um, again, what isn't yours, and that might make you feel tired. Now, if you understand this about yourself, you can withdraw in moments where you feel overwhelmed. You can also let people know. And I can assure you, true friends will understand this. There's nothing to judge, no one to blame. And it's not even a bad situation in itself. It's just about awareness, self awareness, and then making others aware of how you feel. In time, you'll also be able to distinguish between what's yours and what isn't. A burden that your grandmother used to carry, for example, and that you've taken on, but now you can let go of. And this is tremendously important. I'll also give 2 examples which aren't from Mate's book, but from a popular TV show called Bridgerton. Season 3 is coming up, so I'm quite excited about that. Now, there are 2 major male characters in Bridgerton that suffer from family trauma, and up to a point, they're shaped by it until they make the decision to let go of um, the past. The first character is the Duke of Hastings. So he vows never to marry, never to have children, in order to take revenge on his cruel father, who was only interested in what he could do, never who he was, and he never loved him simply for being him. Um, and to confirm the effect that trauma has on the body, because of this, as a child, the Duke of Hastings stuttered, so he wasn't able to speak properly, um, and he was afraid of his speech not being perfect, and the more afraid he was, the more his speech was imperfect, to the dismay of his father. The moment he was taken in by a loving aunt, however, this changed. His stutter went away gradually, and then in his adulthood, the Duke of Hastings is able to make the decision to love, truly love the woman that he married, and give her the family that she wanted. They both wanted, actually, and let go of the burden that he was carrying for so long. The second example, and this is actually my favorite, is that of Anthony Bridgerton. So he runs from love as much as he can because he's scared of the pain that loss brings. This is brought on by the loss of his father at a relatively young age. And because the head of the family was gone, he had to take on all the responsibilities. um, that um, leadership involved in this case. So he was weighed down by all of it. He became very serious. He never laughed anymore. He only spoke about duty and responsibility. He didn't enjoy life anymore the moment his father died and he realized what he had to do. Quite sad, really. It's like um, both his father and the version of Anthony Bridgerton who would have continued to be happy had his father not died, both disappeared that day. Um, but that's until, again, Anthony looks at his shadows, he looks at the trauma, and he decides to let it go. He decides to, again, marry someone he loves and just um, not carry unnecessary burdens anymore because no one actually asked him to anyway. Yes, he was in charge, but that never meant he couldn't actually enjoy his life and he had to be all serious. Watch the show in case you haven't to know what I mean. And if you're a fan, high five. So far, my key insights as an empath um, are are that number one, we need energy to give those we love, and we can't give that energy if it's already gone because of situations that drain us. So be careful about that. Identify those situations and say no to them to the extent that that's possible. I know it's hard. I know it's not something you want to do. Sometimes it's very difficult logistically as well if these situations are connected to a job that you have. But remember to think of yourself as well. Number two, my personal belief is that our ancestors wouldn't want us to carry their burdens anyway. They might want to be acknowledged, their memory to be honored, but they wouldn't want our lives to lack light and lightness because of their shadows. Our shadows are enough to deal with, so let theirs be. And number three, whatever happened in your family past, it might not be as heavy as the Holocaust, as in Mate's case. Um, but remember, you were a child, so it wasn't your fault. I'll say that again. You were a child, so it wasn't your fault. It's not a question of blaming anyone anyway, but looking at the trauma, past, the shadow, the burden, and then letting it go. Two steps. Look at it and then let it go. I can't recommend Gabor Mate's book enough. Um, it's a long book, no denying that. It takes a while to read it. And there are some digressions, you might skip over those, fine. But it's such an enlightening book because it comes from both a health professional and someone who isn't afraid to say they're still undertaking their healing journey. In the description below the video, you'll see a summary of the ideas that I've discussed if you want them. And then you also see a link through which you can purchase the book, which I highly recommend because I feel like I've only touched the surface when it comes to key ideas. Thanks for watching and see you soon.